Hello, my name is April Nickley. I'm the Executive Director of Future Problem Solving, and I am very excited and proud to present our first research panel in this year's competition series. The topic of this panel is invasive species. It is the first practice problem for this competition season, and this webinar will be hosted and presented and facilitated by our Student Advisory Council and our wonderful two experts who have joined us this evening. We do have a few community expectations, just some housekeeping items to let everyone know what to expect. We are recording this event. We realize we have students all over the globe and in different time zones, so we do have the recording available for them. The Q&A feature is what we're asking you for follow-up or new questions for the speakers. Our student advisory group will be creating and addressing as many of these questions as possible. They do also try to make sure that we don't have a lot of duplicate questions or ask a question that has already been asked earlier in the session. And we do ask that you ask questions related to the topic. Our speakers are experts on invasive species. They might not know all of the details about future problem solving, so please make sure we're talking about the invasive species topic. At this time, I'm going to turn the webinar over to Chris. He will be lead moderating on the Student Advisory Council, introducing himself and the members of the leadership group with him. Cyrus, thank you so much. And to all the members of our Student Advisory group, we couldn't do this without you, and we really appreciate your passion in getting together our speakers for this session.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. So yeah, I'm super excited to welcome everybody today and kick off our first panel of the year, and it's on the practice problem 1 topic of invasive species. So as April kind of mentioned, I am Cyrus, and I'm one of the research directors for the Future Problem Solving Student Advisory Council.
Hi, I'm Vedanshi, and I'm another research director for FPS Student Advisory Council.
And hi, everyone. My name's Elizabeth. I'm also one of the research directors for the FPS Student Advisory Council.
Could you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so just before we begin with questions, we just wanted to give a quick intro to the topic of invasive species for those who might be brand new to the topic. So as you can read there, invasive species are non-native organisms that can disrupt ecosystems, outcompete native species, and cause significant ecological and economic damage. These are often introduced through trade, travel, or international release, and they pose a growing threat to biodiversity, agriculture, and cultural landscapes by altering habitats and reducing native populations. Managing invasive species requires prevention, early detection, and ecosystem restoration, though these efforts are costly and not always successful. Safeguarding the future of our ecosystems will depend on vigilant monitoring, predictive science, and responsible human practices to prevent further spread and protect natural biodiversity. The central question that we hope to answer today is how can emergent technologies and global cooperation shape future strategies to prevent and manage the spread of invasive species? Next slide, please.
On behalf of Future Problem Solving, I'm honored and excited to introduce our panelists today. Dr. Nicola Irvin and Dr. Milton E. McGiffen, thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to talk with us today. They'll be discussing their experience with invasive species and the future of the field.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to mention, we've reviewed the questions that you all submitted and have compiled a list for our question and answer session. If any new questions arise during the session, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll try to answer them if time allows.
Okay, so before we begin with the Q&A in just a minute, let's give each of the speakers a brief opportunity to introduce themselves. So you can just go in the order listed on the screen. So Dr. Irvin, if you wouldn't mind sharing a bit about yourself.
Yeah, certainly. I am originally from New Zealand. That's where my accent's from. But I work at the University of California in Riverside in California. I've been there since 2001, so 24 years working with invasive pests. And do you want to know anything more, or just a general, was that just a general introduction? Do
Sure,
you want
that
to
works, yeah.
species or
And
anything? No, okay.
yeah, and we'll probably go in more depth
Okay.
shortly.
So I'm Milton McGiffen. I've worked at UCR for 33 years. I've made my way across the country, so I've worked in pretty much across the whole USA. And actually, in the meanwhile, I've worked in a bunch of other countries just as part of my job, including, interestingly enough, Ukraine. Um, and I've principally worked in crops. So invasive species isn't just crops, but that is my emphasis.
Okay, thank you both for introductions. So without further ado, we're going to jump into the question and answer session. So our first question will just be a general background one, and we're just curious if both of you could briefly share your experience with invasive species, specifically what initially drew you to this expensive field and what has kept you engaged with it. And you can go in
Would you
either
like
order.
me to go first?
Sure.
Okay, so I originally came over in 2001 to work with glassy-winged sharpshooter, and it is a pest of the Californian grape industry. I worked on that for about 10 years, and then I went into Asian citrus psyllid, which is currently a pest of the citrus industry. And I originally came, which attracted me was their classical biological control program. So introducing new species in California to control those two pests. And what's kept me engaged is just, I think with those two species, they also vector a disease. And so they can cause a lot of economic harm. And I think that is what was really attractive. Just, they're important species it's an important area to be in and manage.
So for me, I mostly work with weeds in the way of invasive species. And invasive, so I've had a fairly long career. Earlier, we didn't really, even though we have laws in the books for invasive species, we didn't really think of them as invasive species so much as we just thought of weeds. The invasive part of it's become more of a thing in the last 20 years. Um, a lot of it has to do with the fact that things just move around a lot now. Our supply chains are all global. And so things just come in with supply chains and other reasons like that. But for me, it's just always managing weeds is always a central problem with crops. So that's probably the big reason I'm into it.
Okay, thank you both for the introductions. So yes, a question that was popular among participants was about what challenges are currently faced with the regulation of invasive species.
Well, I would say they're global. I mean, I think that's the biggest problem because you've, first of all, man's become extremely mobile. When I was a boy, it was rare I mean, many people hadn't flown on an airplane. Now everybody gets on an airplane, goes somewhere, and you're shipping things all over the world. So there's all that. And then the other problem is, so you don't want it to come into your country. Well, trying to stop it at the border is really tough because you can't search everything. And then trying to get the other countries to do something about it on their end before it even gets shipped to you, it varies with the country. It's not an easy thing, and probably Dr. Irvine's got some other things to say based on insects.
I completely agree. I find coming from New Zealand, I get a close-up look at different countries and how they treat their borders. So I find that going to New Zealand, they have extremely strict border regulations. They X-ray all of the luggage, every single piece of luggage. They have to X-ray it and make sure that there's no biological matter in there. So you can't bring in, there's a big long list of prohibited goods because you don't want to accidentally introduce something into a very small, sensitive ecosystem. Whereas coming into the States right now at the moment, there is pretty much no customs. I've had times where I haven't even been asked if I'm bringing any live material, or I don't think there's a lot of public awareness coming into the borders in America.
Interesting. And then kind of, I guess, piggybacking off of that, are there common misconceptions that you've seen that maybe the public or policymakers have about invasive species?
Was that the public, sorry?
The public or policymakers, if any.
And so repeat the question.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry. Yeah. The first part was, are there any common misconceptions about invasive species?
Misconceptions.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people think about insects as being invasive. Like, I don't think people think about insects much at all because they are so small and tiny. So I think when they think of invasive species, they might think of, you know, sort of larger predators or, you know, maybe snakes and reptiles. But yeah, I do find that insects often aren't on people's radar, and some insects can be absolutely minute. So I think that is something that, you know, public awareness needs to definitely be enhanced and worked on.
People's attention spans are really short. So invasive species will come into there'll be something that catches where we get a chance to talk about invasive species, like the pythons that are in the Everglades right now. So everybody will be on invasive species for a while, and then something else comes up and they forget about them. So, I mean, it's a continual threat. That's, I think, a bigger problem. It's something that's chronic and continual is very hard for us to deal with because we're particularly with the advent of social media and the internet, because we're always used to the next crises. A lot of these things are just things that just happen gradually over a long period of time, and that's how it becomes a problem. And actually, that's really true with invasive species. A lot of these things come into your country and they don't have invasive characteristics until they're in the ecosystem for a while, and then they develop those characteristics, and then suddenly they're a problem.
I see. That makes sense. And one other kind of follow-up to that is, I guess maybe taking a step back, why do some introduced species or crops become invasive while others do not? And then, you know, what effect does this have on the ecosystem and why should we care?
Yeah, I
I'll
think,
let-
oh, sorry.
No, I'll let you, please.
Yeah,
Plus,
I
I
think
like listening to your accent. It's just, go right ahead.
I think some in some species are more adaptable and tolerate a wider, diverse range of habitats or conditions. They may be more competitive in that way, or have a wider range in diet. We say host plants in my area of being insects. And some can actually be aggressive. We work with Argentine ant, and that's a very aggressive ant species. And so when you have aggression like that, they are more able to outcompete some native, you know, the native ant species, for example.
Yeah, all those things are true. We don't think of I don't think an elephant could ever become invasive. It's big, it's slow, it has a limited range where it could exist. A lot of the insects are really good at becoming invasive. They're kind of, it's a small package. It's going to move around. It's mobile, often mobile. The short generations are going to rapidly adapt to things. So those are all character. Yeah, I guess if you want to think of it from top down, think of something that's going to be able to adapt to different environments and is going to be able to gain competitive advantages over time or maybe even quickly. That's the kind of thing that's invasive.
Thank you both for those perspectives. So I guess with that, we'll transition a bit to future research and development in the field. So first, another popular question from participants. They're especially curious on what do you both believe is the most urgent breakthrough needed in invasive species research or management to better protect ecosystems?
Yeah, Nicola, you got something for that? I'm not sure about that one.
So the breakthrough, I missed the next word, sorry.
The most urgent breakthrough needed in invasive species research or management to better protect ecosystems.
I think awareness, we have talked about that. I think there's some great technologies coming up, but I think that might be a later question. So I don't want to kind of go in there too early, but our lab works on some great technologies.
I guess we can jump to technology now then.
Oh, we
Again, a
can.
good segue.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
maybe AI.
Because I
things
think a
like
big
that.
part of that is sort of, you know, monitoring. We have some technologies in our lab that we're working on. I've worked with genetically modified organisms. So we had a transgenic mosquito that had the gene of a jellyfish inserted in its genome, and it made it glow under UV light. And so it's used as a marker. So the mosquito may be sterile, for example, and then it has this marker gene, so that when you introduce it into the environment, it's mating with the wild population of mosquitoes and causing them to be sterile. But then we can also come in and sample. We can take a scoop out of a pond, we'll look at them under a UV light, and we can see what the percentage of our gene is currently out in the wild population. So that's kind of fun. My lab also works with the Internet of Things. We work with sensors that count ants. So I was talking about Argentine ant. They use irrigation pipes in citrus orchards, and they run along the smooth surface to get from one tree to the other. And they are feeding off the sugar excreta that comes from some of the sap-sucking insects that we work with. And so we use infrared sensors that attach to the irrigation pipes, and when the ants are walking along the pipe, the infrared sensor beam is cut and it counts that ant. So that's pretty cool, neat technology. They think that eventually the sensors will be counting the ants on irrigation pipes, and in real time you'll get an upload onto your app, and you can see in your orchard what areas need to be have insecticide baits deployed, and then a drone will come out maybe at nighttime, fly around to those sensitive areas and drop the insecticide baits for the ants. So that's kind of a cool technology that we've been working with. We also work with drones. We deploy drones down. We work with South American palm weevil, and the drones they can fly over areas where it's hard to get to in the desert and monitor a palm oasis to see how far they're spreading, and you can see the damaged palms in these drone footages. So yeah, there's some exciting technologies coming up.
Yeah,
Okay, that's very cool. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
To say a few more words about awareness, technology are exciting. I mean, it really is. There's some of the things you can do with drones now. We do a lot of things with drones ourselves that are just wonderful, but the awareness part is tough, because everybody has so many things they're thinking of, and there are opportunities to do something about some of these problems, like how long, well, the citrus greening pest came in was somebody brought it in from India just because they wanted the leaves for a spice. And they just really weren't aware that this was a problem. There was I think about 3, 4 years ago, that there was a Chinese company who was sending around these different seeds for free and encouraging people to plant them. And fortunately, I did a couple news interviews. Fortunately, it did get on the news, so people knew, don't do this, because you don't know what these seeds are, and you're going to put them in the ground, and it could be a very bad thing. So the awareness of common everyday people is important. It wouldn't hurt to have a little something taught in high school, for example. That would actually be not a bad idea.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So just on a different note, what ethical concerns arise in eradicating invasive species?
Well, okay, so I'll start that one. There are these history questions you get all the time, like if you had a chance to kill Hitler before he had a chance to take over Germany, would you do it? If you had a chance to wipe out a whole species, would you do that? And so that is kind of an ethical quandary. It has been asked, if you could wipe out all mosquitoes, would you do that? And I don't know. I mean, it comes up in even things like Star Trek. There are a couple episodes where they had a chance to wipe out a really nasty species like the Borg, and they didn't do it. because they just thought that was kind of unethical. But on the other hand, the Borg are trying to wipe everybody else out. So I don't know. I think those are interesting quandaries to discuss. I'll let Dr. Irvin see if she has anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, ethics is an interesting one. I mean, I know with insects, you know, I think with vertebrates, maybe ethics might be thought of as more important by kind of the general population. I know that in New Zealand, we have rabbits. We have issues with
Oh
rabbits.
yeah.
And yeah, and we wanted to introduce a virus to kill the rabbits, but the virus, you know, causes this painful death and suffering. So, you know, that was kind of an ethical concern. But if you think of insects, you know, in introducing a painful virus for insects, you know, you wouldn't think of the same ethics. But then, you know, rabbits, they become part of the ecosystem. So, you know, there's also the ethical consideration of now what is relying on those rabbits. You know, they're also part of the ecosystem in the food chain and in some countries. So,
I'll give you one other one. If you are in a place where you don't have this organism, should you be allowed to study that organism in your place? And you're going to say, I will put all these measures in, so there's no way I can get out, but there's a long history of things getting out. So that's another good question, another good one.
yeah, we work in the insect and quarantine building on UCR, and so that building has different levels, and the very top level is kind of, as you say, it's designed not, you know, so that nothing can escape from it, and there's all these certain control measures and routines and protocols in place for people to work up there. We have to burn everything that we take out and things like that. So they do have places that we can get permits to work on those kind of insects, and our lab has started to move more into kind of preventative invasive species. So we know that they're not here yet, but we know that they're coming. You know, maybe they're over on, you know, in a certain area, and we know that it's only just a matter of time before they'll make it to California. And so our lab's been doing sort of we research kind of their biology and make some predictions about what's going to happen when it gets here, and then also research natural enemies so that we've got a head start when it gets here.
Yeah, and then there's the flip side to it. If you don't do even there's a risk that they might get out. If you don't ever do the research, what are you going to do when they actually get there? You're going to be playing behind. I don't know. I mean, that I will say that the facility they built at our campus is outstanding. I mean, it was very thoroughly researched. It's just it's top notch. But still, you know, people do dumb things once in a while, and somebody leaves the door open or something. But usually this facility she's talking about has a bunch of fail safes to prevent that. But still, stupid things happen, and I don't know. I don't know what to say. I guess everything in life is a trade-off. So you have to decide what's the appropriate cost benefit ratio. What are you willing to tolerate?
Okay, thank you both for the anecdotes. Sounds like always trade-offs. So I guess the next question is, students were curious, if applicable, if you guys have examples, are there any invasive species that have adapted in surprising or unexpected ways?
Well, there's many. I'll let her start because I'm sure she's got some excellent initial examples with insects.
Oh, the thing that comes to mind is actually, and it's not something that I've worked on, but the cane toad. I don't know if you know the story
Oh,
about the
so
cane
tell them
toad
the
being
story.
introduced into Australia to control sugarcane beetle, and it was just an absolute failed, you know, miserably failed experiment, really, of biological control. But it was an example. So the cane toad was introduced, but what they didn't realize it before they introduced it was that it was a complete generalist predator, and that the cane beetle was actually mostly lives its life at the top of the canes, the sugar canes, and this toad can't actually get to them. On top of that, it's poisonous, so that, you know, if any animals are predating on the toad, they often die. And interesting with adaptability is that these cane toads have actually evolved to have longer and longer legs because they build up into such massive populations. They're causing massive ecological damage, and the big populations mean that those with the longer legs can get away and further and spread further and get into new areas, and so they have a better survival, and so they have evolved to have longer and longer legs. So I think that's kind of an interesting example.
I'll give you a more mundane, well, possibly mundane, ragweed. So ragweed I think was endemic to the US. And it was planted in Europe, I think, as a curiosity more than anything else. I think they put it in gardens, and it was not really didn't do much for a couple of centuries. Well, more in the later in the 20th century, it started to become invasive. So its biology changed to the point where it just spread all over. And so you often will hear about ragweed pollen here in the US. Well, the US is much more sparsely populated than Europe. Europe has all these really, pretty dense population. So for them, it's a huge problem. And I don't know what the ragweed did, how it changed its biology to become so well adapted, probably better adapted to living in cities, would be my guess. But that was a great example. It had been there a long time. Nobody really cared about it much, and then suddenly it just took off, and now it's a terrible problem for them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's there's a lot of really diverse adaptations and they're all super interesting. This was a question from the chat. What are some invasive species with the worst economical impact or that impacts the economy like very strongly?
Well, Nicola's working on several of them, so I'll let her go.
Yeah, I actually researched this one because I wanted some figures for you. So I work with the glassy wing sharpshooter, which I mentioned. It vectors a bacteria, Xylella fastidiosa, and that causes Pierce's disease in grapes. And just with Pierce's disease, there's actually over 100 different host plants, but just for grapes, it costs California approximately 104 million annually. So that's a massive economic damage. That was from 2025. And then Asian citrus psyllid is something I also work on. It causes Huanglongbing, which is greening disease in citrus. And in Florida, so we don't have Huanglongbing in commercial citrus in Riverside, but it will probably eventually get in there, but because it's in residential. But in Florida, citrus production has declined by 90%, and the economic losses due to Huanglongbing over a 5-year period was estimated to be 1 billion annually. So that's some big figures.
And there's many other examples. We could spend all day doing them. She just personally knows. She's personally seen some of the worst. So yeah.
Wow, yeah, it's a large amount of money. I guess one other question. Students were interested in hearing about, I mean, if this is applicable, a failed attempt at managing invasive species and why you think that attempt failed.
Well, she just gave you the
I
one.
mean,
That was a good
Oh
one.
yeah.
yeah, the cane toad is definitely one of those ones, and I love it because it's just a complete failure on so many accounts. And I think the reason why is because there wasn't enough research done back in those days. This was a long time ago. They've learned a lot of lessons with biological control in that field. And I think back then, they didn't do enough research on, matching where the insect was and where the toad can the toad actually reach it. They didn't look at sort of how specific the toad was. I work now with parasitoids, which are species specific. They only attack, a small number of species. And so they're a lot easier to kind of do host specificity testing to see, whether they would be safe to introduce to a new environment. I think the cade tone, and they didn't sort of think ahead to know that it was poisonous. That was another thing, that it's killing a lot of animals and disrupting the ecosystem in that way as well. So there's definitely something about, carefully selecting biological control agents.
Yeah. I was trying to remember another example. What was the deal with mongoose in India? Didn't they bring it in to eradicate pythons or something? And then they had a problem because they had mongoose all over the place.
That rings a bell, actually.
Does, me too. So somebody might want to Google, but
Yeah.
that is an example. I think that is an example. I think they brought it in because they were going to eliminate cobras or pythons or whatever, cobras, I guess. And it ended up becoming a problem unto itself. And so I guess the moral of that story, to couple with what she was telling you, if you bring in a species deliberately, you need to do a lot of research on that before you bring it in and make sure that it's not likely to cause bigger problems than what you already had. It's not just New Zealand's got that rabbit problem. What I thought of was Australia. They've had a problem with rabbits forever, and they've had hunts. There's another mammal they've had a lot of problem with in Australia. What is that? It was introduced, and I can't remember. Stoat was one you had, was another one you had in New Zealand, isn't it?
Yeah, stoats, rats, ferrets, we have a lot of problems. New Zealand didn't evolve with any kind of mammal, so all the mammals that are in New Zealand are introduced species, and a lot of them, cats, dogs, stoats, ferrets, rats, they attack or native birds or their eggs. So yeah, we do have a lot of invasive species and a lot of issues with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for those interesting examples. So now just taking a step back, in general, how do invasive species affect human health and agriculture, and what future risks should we anticipate?
Well, so I do agriculture. I mean, they're a huge problem. Uh, a lot of our weeds came from actually came with the English when they colonized the eastern U.S. A lot of it came in ship's ballast. The seeds were in the ballast, and they just dropped it off. And there's many other examples. So a lot of the weeds we have real problems with, well, actually a lot of the insects and the weeds and the diseases we have real problems with are invasive. The ecosystem doesn't have as many um, predators or whatnot to regulate them, so they take off and they become a huge pest. And to put a dollar value on it, it's probably incalculable, but it's certainly in the billions.
Yeah, that's why I think invasive species, a lot of them do come over without their kind of natural enemies or competitors that they normally would have in their home country. And that's why they're able to run rampant and cause such havoc and economic harm, because they can, spread so easily and populate so easily without those control measures. And especially in places like New Zealand, which are, it's an island, they have fewer native species. They aren't that ecosystem isn't as resilient as a new invasive species coming in.
Thank you both for the perspectives. So our next question, I guess, comes from some optimistic future problem-solving students, and they're wondered if there are any under-recognized positive effects that invasive species have on particular ecosystems.
Ooh, good one. Never
Interesting.
thought of it that way. Yeah.
I don't know. Do they increase biodiversity? I mean, normally they say that invasive species can compete with natives and decrease biodiversity, but I haven't thought of that actually.
It's a good question. I can't name one. Usually,
No.
usually we don't. There probably are, just by sheer random chance, because things have moved around so much. But I can't name one. I can name several invasive species we brought in because we thought it was a really good idea, and they actually did do some positive things. The problem was they had a lot of other things they did, like arundo. Arundo's all over the world, so it's giant cane, and the problem with it is it'll get into a river system and just take over. Um, and it actually has it was been brought in many different places. They used it to thatch roofs. The reeds you have in reed instruments like a flute. No, flute's not a reed. A bassoon would be one. It's a reed instrument. That's a rondo. So they deliberately will plant that because they want those products. The problem is it then takes off and becomes a problem. So that it subsequently does some good. probably people have made lemonade out of lemons many times, and they probably have found good things for them, but whether it's a net positive is another matter.
Yeah, I think the word invasive means not just that it's in the wrong place, but that it is causing harm of either economic or, ecological harm. So I think that word invasive species does connotate a negative, have a negative connotation, but I think there are some kind of accidentally introduced species maybe that are good. I can think of some biological control agents, for example, that have accidentally come in with their invasive species, and so they are doing a good job, they do have a positive outcome.
Yeah, thank you for your insight. So now shifting more towards managing invasive species, are there ways to create a balanced and well-functioned ecosystem without minimal human invasion?
Well, I mean, there's ecosystem theory, and it does go into that. So they all, to quote one of the trivial parts of it, they always encourage diversity. And that's kind of the downside of invasive species. They generally will decrease the diversity in an ecosystem. But to make a resilient ecosystem, you want it to be diverse. Because usually that means you have a lot of different, if this species suffers, there's another species that'll fill that niche so that it doesn't leave a lot of big, open, exploitable niches for an invasive species to come in.
Yeah, so so the question was about creating balance. I think in my area we do promote and kind of enhance, trying to promote and strengthen native populations. I think that, and biodiversity, and that gives a lot more resilient ecosystem to invasive species. And probably just public awareness and sort of minimizing kind of spread through human interaction, I think would help with balance.
Okay. And our next question is also a common one asked among participants. And they're wondering about both of your experiences with translating research into policy. So maybe you guys have seen something indirectly or directly, but just in general experience with translating invasive species research to actionable laws or other policy.
Well, we do have invasive species laws in the country, and so that would be an example thereof. There are many other examples. I mean, the quarantine laws that you put into place basically are based on research. Somebody went out and figured out, hey, we have a problem, and you need to quarantine this. Nicola most likely has more specific examples she to come to mind.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have policies and laws surrounding Asian citrus psyllid at the moment to prevent the spread of huanglongbing. And so there are quarantine areas, and there's regulations on whether fruit or material can be moved around different areas. I also noticed that oriental fruit fly was also under quarantine again in where I live. And so they do regularly kind of post out these things, and we try and attend the local Riverside insect fair, and we usually try and have an invasive species booth just to get the information out there, because a lot of the time they put in these quarantines, but the general public don't know about this. So they're actually, taking fruit from their home citrus trees and sharing it with their neighbors or their, friends at work, and then that's how things spread. So public awareness is something that really needs to be important. A lot of those quarantines, the kind of conventional growers might be aware of them, but not residential properties.
Yeah, those are all definitely great points to keep in mind for everyone watching. And so our next question is, in what ways has climate changed influence the speed, routes, or success of biological invasions globally?
Yeah, that's an important question. I think climate change, with the warming of certain areas and redistribution of water, I think a lot of invasive species are going to increase their home range. And so they're going to be going into new areas that they haven't previously been. So that's going to cause a lot of issues. I know California is kind of a hot spot for invasive species. I think we get one new species every 40 days or something.
Yeah.
And it's very, it has a very warm climate, so it is very conducive to having invasive species be able to reproduce and easily. There's no harsh winter to kind of kill them off. So yeah, I think with climate change, that's going to be an issue with an increase in temperature and not having those harsh conditions to kill off some of the populations over a winter, for example.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm good. That's a good answer.
Sure. Yeah, we can move on to our next question. So we've talked a lot about prevention of invasive species, but we have students who are also curious about after the invasive species has been either eradicated or controlled, are there any challenges with restoring the ecosystems after the infestation has been eliminated?
Well, yeah, absolutely. If it's damaged the ecosystem, meaning it's caused some species to collapse, so they just aren't there anymore, then you've got a problem. And that restoration would be the idea would be to try to change it back to the way it was. Um, Specific examples, there's a lot of specific examples of that with weeds, because weeds are pretty obvious. You see it out there, and they've swallowed up large sections of something. So once you take it out, a lot of the weeds will crowd out other plants. So once you take that out, you're gonna have a big bare area, and you want the species that are naturally in that ecosystem to come back and reinvade and establish themselves. So yeah, those are all you have to keep that. You have to think a step ahead.
And I apologize, I missed the question because my son tried to come in. Sorry about that.
Yeah, sure, no worries. The question was about recovering from invasive species infestations, specifically either challenges or future technologies involved with restoring the ecosystems after the invasive species has been eradicated.
That's a good question. I mean, I think California has had some invasive species that they have managed to eradicate. And I think after that, it's very important to do monitoring. I don't know if that was mentioned, but I think monitoring is extremely important, and having technologies, maybe, our lab works with, say, pheromone traps that are specific to that species. And it draws within, quite a few miles around to draw them into a particular trap, for example, to see if they're in the area. Yeah, so monitoring, I think, is very important after eradication to see whether it comes back in.
Yeah, totally agree. Those are very important subjects, excuse me, to touch light on. Our next question is from the Q&A. A couple of people asked, what are some futuristic technologies, like maybe AI, created to defend against invasive species?
Well, I could see having so AI's got much better pattern recognition. So you could have just simple pattern recognition with cameras in an area that would either identify something or at least make note of it so an expert would come take a look at it. And I think that's happened to some degree where you have large scale, say you've got a whole shipment of whatever coming in on a barge, coming in on from somewhere, and it's just far too many for a human to go through and look. You could very easily see robots or even just cameras going through and examining that whole thing. So those would be very obvious technologies. What's been deployed so far, I'm not sure. maybe Nicola knows.
Oh, I know, as I've mentioned, we've worked with different monitoring and drones. I think that will become, I think drones and AI will be kind of deploying maybe insecticides or herbicides even on invasive species. And yeah, monitoring, I think there'll be like kind of instead of face recognition for humans, there'll be kind of insect recognition. So maybe one trap, and then there's kind of an AI program to recognize whether the invasive species is actually coming to that trap, and they would get kind of real time feedback from that pheromone trap, or a bait trap.
There's also
Thank you.
remote,
Sorry.
there's a lot of remote sensing things out there now where satellites are able to sense things down to smaller and smaller sizes. So you just with satellite data, if you wanted to do a whole area census of something, so say you had an insect that defoliated or a disease that defoliated a forest, you could sense that just simply by having a satellite fly a pass over it. And there's a lot more opportunities to do that now than there ever were.
Thank you. So I think we've touched on this briefly, but our next question is, what role will citizen science play in early detection and control of invasive species, and what are its limitations?
Well, again, just being aware of this stuff and coming back to us, being aware of this and knowing who to tell about it is really important. So in this country, in America, we have a cooperative extension service. So in every county, there is a county office. And if you have and there's going to be an ag commissioner. So if you have something you suspect might be an invasive species in America, you should actually take it to the ag commissioner. But if you get it to the cooperative extension office, they'll deal with it. Um, so having just citizens having awareness so they know what to look at, being able to just take a picture of something. I mean, now it's easy to take a picture of something and send it to somebody. So if they even just have that wherewithal to do that and knowledge of it, that's why I say it does make a lot of sense to include this along with managing a budget and basic things like that and at the high school level, just so everybody knows.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I know they have apps now that identify plants, and I know I'm sure that eventually they'll have them for insects. I'm not sure. I don't think they have them at the moment, but I know I have one for plants, and so maybe they can, have that, citizens can take a photo and upload them to an app and see whether it is a species that is there. We do some citizen science projects. I know we have posters that we do a little QR code, have you seen this insect, and then you can scan and you can report it. That's for, say, South American palm weevil as an example that we work with.
Well, what does New Zealand, I was wondering if New Zealand mobilizes its citizens that way, because I know it's a huge issue down there. Do they do anything in particular?
Not that I'm aware of, but I haven't worked there for 24 years, so I'm not we're probably not right up to speed with what they're up to.
Okay, thank you both for the insights. Look at the time, maybe we can fit in two more questions and then wrap up the session for today. So the next question is another popular one from students, and they're wondering what metrics are used to measure the ecological and economic outcomes of policy interventions for invasive species? Maybe just in general, like metrics for measuring kind of how invasive species populations are doing and just in management in general.
So I'll give some of the big ones and then I'll let her come up with other things that she knows. Obviously, they want to know how big of an area are we talking about here? And you'll see these statistics presented in the literature, or how many acres this consumes, how wide an area. You'll see maps. The economic impact is the other obvious one, where they're just going to report data. Now, economic data, it's a bit more, it's a bit subjective when they do that, but it's nonetheless everybody wants to hear dollars and cents, so that's an obvious measure of it. Numbers, they'll do counts of these things if they can. So they give you just a sheer idea of the population size. And there's some of these species that are just cyclical in nature. Gypsy moth is an example of that. So that's what I got.
Yeah, and I agree. We work with sort of how many states are, sorry, how many counties in California are affected by certain invasive species, kind of looking at the spread. South American palm weevil has been progressing from Mexico into kind of in San Diego. It's in San Diego at the moment, and they're trying to slow its spread so that it doesn't work its way up to Riverside. So there's always I've noticed, I always get an update on, where certain invasive species are and what quarantines are sort of in place in those invasive species. And then economic damage is a big one. And maybe even loss of production due to an invasive species. So, I know in Florida, loss of production from Asian citrus psyllid and huanglongbing, because the huanglongbing causes a low production and then eventually kills the plant. So they're constantly having to, I think every 5 to 7 years, they just have to pull out their plants and replant them, and that's what they have to do in Florida at the moment.
Wow.
Definitely. Thank you. So for our last question, in your view, what does the future hold for invasive species research and management over the next decade or two?
So just management, there's always going to be invasive species. There always have been. In a way, you could think of humans as invasive because we've gotten all over the globe. And when you first crossed that land bridge into the Americas, that was an invasion. So there's always going to be a problem. I suppose detection, but better cooperation between political entities, whether they're states or countries themselves. Better interdiction at the border would be a good idea. There's going to be an explosion of different kinds of technology because AI is coming and we have better satellites and remote sensing than we ever had. So those would be the broad strokes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to make a plug for we have a website, the Center for Invasive Species Research. Hang on, I need to give that. Maybe I'll do it in the chat. Would that be better? Or do you want me to? Yeah, it's CISR. So it must be Center of Invasive Species Research, and that's .ucr.edu. So there, they have a list of invasive species, and you can click on them and get more information, distribution, some of those things that you were talking about, distribution and economic availability. And I didn't have anything to add because Dr. McGiffen did answer that question very well.
Okay, so with that, we're going to wrap up the panel for today. Thank you all for coming, and on behalf of the entire future problem solving community, I wanted to extend a huge thank you to Dr. Irvin and Dr. McGiffen for their time and insights today.
Well, thank you. It was my pleasure.
Absolutely, it's an honor.
Yeah, and before we officially conclude, I'm going to turn it over to Vedika and Mahi to talk a little bit more about the Future Problem Solving Student Advisory Council.
Hi, everyone. On behalf of the Future Problem Solving Council, we have been so pleased to host this event and so excited to see everyone here. I'm Vedika. I'm one of the co-executive directors of the council, and we'd love for you all to be a part of the mission. We're still accepting applications to join the council, and anyone over 13 years is eligible to join.
Hi, I'm Mahi. I'm co-executive director with Vedika. The Student Advisory Council's current projects include outreach and sharing insights from students for students. So future problem solvers around the world can hear from other students or more experienced future problem solvers. We're working on a host of free materials to support future problem solvers, the first of which is a guide to global issues and many more projects.
On the council, we offer members the opportunity to propose unique ideas like this one. And if it interests you, you can apply by emailing studentadvisorycouncil@fpspi.org, and you're going to receive an application to join, or just you can email us with any questions you have. Once again, a big thanks to our panelists for taking the time out of their day to talk to us, and thank you to everyone who attended.
Thank you, everyone. And to clarify, we are not accepting applications to the council for membership, but we are accepting your information so that we can stay in touch and you can hear about future opportunities. If you have any questions about the Student Advisory Council, please feel free to throw them in the chat. Vedika and I are happy to field them. Thank you so much.
To our Student Advisory Group and our speakers for this informative session. As a resident of Florida, I heard some things that really resonated with what's happening in our state, but also learned so much globally about what's happening in regards to this topic. So certainly always enjoyable. If you are students, especially our senior students, if you have not noticed advertisements on social media, we will be involved in a career fest with Immerse Education the first week of October. They are offering, as part of our partnership with Immerse, they are offering free registration. So please make sure you're watching Instagram. I know our students are on Instagram more than Facebook, but on Instagram that will be offered and how you can sign up for that. It's hosted from the UK. There's a lot of great information from our global community that will be offered. So I hope to see some of you there for that. Thank you so much, and keep problem solving.